topic I chose for the presentation was examining the relationship between inflation and wages in the U.S. So just first to just go over the agenda, what this is going to be covering. It's just pretty much a brief intro on what wages are and what inflation is, which using like this CPI. This is pretty straightforward, pretty brief. And then just go into a little bit why the relationship between these two is important and some of the interactions between wages and inflation. And then after that, just some current trends based on some articles from The Economist, that some trends that they've pointed out. And then a lot of this is impacted by the Trump tariffs. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And then also just finally some common policy responses to high inflation or stagnant wages. All right, so first, what are wages and inflation? So inflation, we've gone over this in class, but it's a general increase in the price of goods and services over time in an economy which leads to a decrease in purchasing power. And this is measured by the CPI, the other known as the Consumer Price Index. So the government creates a group of commonly purchased goods and collects the prices of these goods, measures the prices of these goods over a period of months. And then they choose a base year where they set the CPI to 100, a very stable, normal year where the economy looks pretty perfect with like ideal conditions. So they set the CPI to 100 at that year. And then you measure the inflation rate by taking your new CPI for your year, subtracting it from the old CPI of the previous year, dividing it by the old CPI, this equation right here, and then multiplying by 100. And keep in mind that these CPIs have to have the same base year in order for this inflation rate formula to hold true. And healthy inflation for the economy is typically around 2%, and high inflation hurts consumers. Now into just a brief overview of wages. It's the money people receive in exchange for labor or services. And nominal wages, there's two different key words here in wages, nominal and real. And the nominal wages is the amount of money you see on your paycheck, whereas real wages are your wages that are adjusted for inflation, and it determines your purchasing power in the economy. So the formula for finding your real wage is the nominal wage over the CPI times 100, and this would show you how much purchasing power you would have in the base year for that CPI. So, yeah. And then, so why does inflation and wages matter? Why are they connected? Well, for an example, if there's a 5% inflation rate and a 3% wage increase, the real wage goes down by 2%. And the worker has 2% less purchasing power than they would have had. So when inflation outpaces wages, the economy tends to suffer. They're called stagnant wages, promote less spending in the economy, which creates businesses to cut down on hiring, and this can lead to unemployment because there's less money going to these businesses, so they have to save money somehow, so they cut down on employment. And then this relationship can also influence economic inequality, because these stagnant wages actually hurt poor people more than rich people, because they have to spend a bigger portion of their paycheck on the necessary goods, whereas richer people will spend a smaller portion of their paycheck on those goods and can save more. So yeah, the poor people are mainly affected. They're affected the worst by this relationship. So now some more interactions between wages and inflation. Wages can actually drive inflation. When workers advocate for better wages, companies give them better wages, and then companies normally have to increase their prices to balance their increased labor costs. And this is called a wage price spiral, and it creates a positive feedback loop where wages go up, inflation goes up, wages go up, inflation goes up, something like that. And it can be pretty healthy. It's pretty healthy for the economy. It's just kind of normally how it works, it creates that 2% inflation rate, and it's a pretty delicate balance, because if one gets too heavily outweighed the other, then things start to happen. So sometimes there's a lag in wage response to inflation, where wages just take a little bit longer to adjust to the inflation, and this hurts the workers because they are feeling the effects of the inflation but not being properly compensated for it. So this is not really great for the economy. Yeah, wages take longer to adjust to the increased inflation rates. So now the real wage growth versus inflation. If real wages growth stays consistent or outpaces inflation, it's generally pretty good for the economy, because people are making more money and they can keep up with buying their necessary goods and keep putting spending into the economy, which gives businesses more money and to create jobs and stuff. So it's pretty good when the real wage is equal with inflation or outpaces it just a little bit. All right, so now some current trends from the Economist articles I read and looked at. So the U.S. core CPI expectation jumped by 5.5% at an annualized rate as of January 2025. This isn't the actual rate that there's two different things here. I think it's from a survey from University of Michigan, where they just asked like a bunch of random people, and this is what people thought, that inflation would rise by 5.5% at an annualized rate as in January. But it's not the economists' model, which I'll talk about in a minute. So this gap between historical trends and actual inflation may be a little bit influenced by Trump tariffs, because these tariffs are very big deals, a very big shock to the economy, and it's kind of hard to predict what's exactly going to happen. So people are naturally going to be a little bit scared, and that is probably a big reason for this big jump of 5.5% of expected inflation rate. So, and also there's some concerns from economists that the inflation rate is getting stuck at 3%, which is the ideal is around 2%. So 3% is not really ideal. That's not a great place to be stuck at for inflation. And as you can see in this, as you can see in this graph here, here's the actual expected rate of people of inflation goes here, and you can see the spike in 2025 January, early 2025, and then the economist model up here shows the spike over here, obviously from COVID and the Federal Reserve's lack of response for a while. Spikes up here, and then it starts to slowly go down, but then they're getting a little concerned here because it looks like it could stay stagnant around 3, which, like I said, is not that good. So some of the things that are influencing this is Trump's promises to cut taxes, which could lead to higher inflation. The higher tariffs obviously leads to inflation, increases the domestic products prices, and he's also threatening to crack down on immigration, which could also lead to inflation. So these are a lot of concerns for inflation. So you can kind of see that in these graphs that people are getting kind of nervous about this, and they don't really know how it's going to play out. So then, how does this affect the wages? So when workers expect higher future costs, they want higher pay. So wages grew at 5.9% annualized rate in January, outpacing the inflation, which is good for the economy typically. So this could create a wage spiral, pushing up inflation further, which is pretty natural. But when consumers expect higher prices, they increase. When consumers expect, I think there's a mistake here, but when consumers expect higher prices, they depend to purchase the goods now. So, which creates more demand in the moment, which also pushes up prices. So this is not a very good situation going on, because people are expecting high inflation, and then that expectation is going to influence the way they act. So they're going to start buying all their expensive goods like technologies and stuff right now instead of waiting on it, which is going to increase the demand and possibly even make the inflation even worse. And I thought this was also really interesting, this graph over here. It's expectation by party affiliation, and I just thought it was very interesting how the The Democratic Party, you can see this spike. They're expecting inflation rates to spike, but the Republican Party is expecting them to dip, which I thought is very interesting. And it's going to be kind of hard to see how this plays. It's going to be difficult to predict how this plays out. So I just thought that was very interesting. And so moving on, some common responses to rising inflation and like bad wages. Obviously, we discussed this in class, but raising the interest rates, the Federal Reserve raising interest rates, that reduces inflation. So you can see here in this graph, you have the rate versus time, and then it dropped in COVID, obviously, to kind of boost the economy a little bit more. But and there's also this thing called quantitative tightening, where the Fed, we also talked about this briefly in class, but the Fed shrinks its reserves by selling off the government bonds that it owns, or just letting them mature without reinvesting. And this withdraws money from the banking system, and therefore kind of slows down the economy a little bit and reduces that inflation. So there's also fiscal policy, but this fiscal policy for this type of fighting inflation is not typically very popular, because you would have to reduce government spending, which is going to reduce jobs created by government spending and stuff, and also raise taxes, which is very unpopular. Even though it might be the healthiest thing for the economy, people aren't going to want that. So it's going to be a very unpopular decision to raise people's taxes, especially in the government positions. So but that could also be used to help out with the inflation rates. All right, so thank you. That's pretty much all I have for the presentation, and